When I first set foot in Sunrise Bluffs, I was greeted by immaculate lawns, gently curving streets, and houses with pristine exteriors neatly arranged in cul-de-sacs. A large wooden sign at the entrance declared it a peaceful community for all, accompanied by meticulously pruned hedges displaying the letters S and B in vibrant flowers. It was the picture of suburban order, exactly the sort of place you might imagine for a quiet retirement or to raise a family. My spouse and I had moved to Sunrise Bluffs from a bustling coastal city where traffic, towering skyscrapers, and unrelenting noise had worn down our nerves. I was looking for a calmer environment, one that would allow me to focus on my field research and writing. You see, I'm an ornithologist, not just any ornithologist, but one who has spent decades traveling to far-flung corners of the globe, documenting bird species, analyzing migratory patterns, and lecturing internationally on habitat conservation. I've published books and peer-reviewed articles, collaborated with wildlife organizations, and even had a few cameo appearances on nature documentaries. But none of that was general knowledge here in Sunrise Bluffs. In fact, for most of my neighbors, I was simply the new person who liked to sit on the porch listening for warblers at dawn. And that was precisely how I wanted it, uncomplicated. After years of public engagements and high-stakes conservation debates, I craved a normal neighborhood existence. I planned to keep my identity as a globally renowned ornithologist under wraps. There was no reason to wave my credentials in anyone's face, especially in a place so devoted to rules and order. Shortly after settling into our spacious craftsman-style home, we heard a light, polite knock at the door. Opening it, I found a woman standing on my welcome mat with a wide, taut smile that didn't reach her eyes. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with flawlessly coiffed hair that gleamed under the midday sun. She wore pastel slacks, a precisely pressed blouse, and a small name tag with the Sunrise Bluffs Homeowners Association logo. Tucked under her arm was a binder so thick it looked like a homemade encyclopedia. "Good afternoon," she said in a voice that somehow managed to be both sugary sweet and deeply authoritative. "My name is Victoria Hardell, but folks around here sometimes call me Karen." She gave a tight, clipped laugh. "I'm a vice president of our HOA. On behalf of the board, I wanted to welcome you." I smiled politely and introduced myself. Victoria, Karen, didn't seem especially interested in my background beyond a perfunctory glance inside my living room. She handed me a folder brimming with printed guidelines, detailing everything from allowable fence heights to rules for holiday decorations. "We take great pride in maintaining a uniform, harmonious atmosphere," she declared. "I trust you'll find our regulations quite straightforward. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me." I assured her I would, though the sheer volume of rules felt daunting. Still, it was a small price to pay for the serenity of a tidy suburban life. Karen left, cautioning me that our HOA is extremely vigilant when it comes to preserving neighborhood standards. Her final words clung to the air with the weight of an unspoken threat. At the time, I brushed it off. After all, I was no stranger to meticulous rules. I'd spent years on research expeditions where small oversights could doom entire conservation efforts. Little did I know that Karen's zeal for control would soon unleash chaos, not just upon my routine, but upon something far more precious, the local bird sanctuary. A week passed. We were still unpacking boxes and arranging furniture, but I was already itching to explore the outdoors. One early morning, I ventured into the greenbelt that stretched behind Sunrise Bluffs, an area rumored to host diverse plant and animal life. A short walk down a gentle slope led me to a small bird sanctuary nestled between rolling meadows and a winding creek. A worn wooden sign read, "Sunrise Sanctuary, a habitat for native and migratory birds." The sanctuary was surprisingly lush for a suburban setting. Towering cottonwoods and sycamores offered shade, while thick grasses swayed in the breeze, dotted with wildflowers in shades of violet and yellow. The morning air was alive with birdsong, mockingbirds, sparrows, a couple of finches, and the distinct trill of a western meadowlark. I felt my pulse quicken. This patch of land was an ornithologist's dream, an oasis for native and migrating birds, right at my doorstep. As I strolled along the narrow dirt path, I spotted a rusted chain-link fence marking the sanctuary's boundary where it met the neighborhood's property lines. A simple gate, presumably installed by the county years ago, stood propped open. Inside, a few primitive bird-watching blinds were erected, their wooden slats old and in need of TLC. Several informational signboards, partially faded from years of sun and rain, detailed the species one might encounter during different seasons. Clearly, this sanctuary had once been the pride of local conservationists, though it now showed signs of neglect. Nevertheless, the bird population thrived. I watched cardinals flit by, listened to a red-winged blackbird's sharp conclave, and even spied a roadrunner dart between scrub bushes. For a moment, I forgot I was in the midst of a planned suburb. The world melted away, leaving just the vibrant tapestry of avian life. I took out my small field notebook and jotted down quick observations, scribbling notes on species counts. A fleeting sense of euphoria washed over me. Here was a place where I could continue my work quietly, gather data on local populations, and maybe even encourage the neighborhood to support this slice of wilderness. Little did I suspect that some considered this sanctuary an eyesore. But soon enough, I'd find out exactly how far Karen would go to reshape Sunrise Bluffs in her own rigid image, and the tragic toll her ambition would exact upon this haven for birds. Returning from the sanctuary, I noticed Karen's SUV creeping around the neighborhood, her hawkish gaze scanning each lawn. She pulled over to inspect one house whose owner had installed a wind chime that evidently clashed with the HOA's official color palette. Another neighbor was politely but firmly reminded that no vehicles were to be parked overnight on the street without express permission. I tried not to stare as she meticulously recorded these violations in a leather-bound notebook. She caught sight of me walking and waved somewhat stiffly, as if to remind me she was watching. Something about her intense vigilance unsettled me, yet I assumed it was simply the quirk of a strict HOA official and let the matter rest. A few days later, however, at a small neighborhood get-together, I learned more. A retiree named Mr. Ortega confided in me over a slice of homemade pie that Karen had once campaigned to cut down a row of century-old oaks near the entrance to Sunrise Bluffs. She claimed the trees shed leaves that created a messy curb appeal, Mr. Ortega said, shaking his head. We raised an uproar and managed to stop her, but she never forgave the people who opposed her. My brow furrowed. Why would she want to remove something so beautiful? Aren't those oaks part of the neighborhood's charm? Mr. Ortega shrugged. She's fixated on the idea of neatness, uniformity, property values. Anything that doesn't fit her narrow standard is a target. He lowered his voice. So watch out if there's anything about your place or your interests that she decides is unsightly or out of step. I offered a vague smile. Thanks for the warning. I'll keep an eye out. Inside, though, I felt a prickle of unease. If Karen disliked shedding leaves, how would she feel about the bird sanctuary's messier corners? Wind-scattered seeds, molted feathers, muddy banks? I made a mental note to ask around, see if others felt the sanctuary was threatened. For now, I filed it under potential problems and try to focus on the positives. After all, not everyone in the HOA could share Karen's extreme viewpoint. Yet the seeds of concern were planted in my mind. Over time, my morning visits to the sanctuary became routine. I'd quietly document bird species, note their feeding patterns, and watch for any signs of disturbance. Though my professional background remained unspoken to most neighbors, I struck up a conversation with a local teacher named Amy Lee, who sometimes brought her students on many field trips to the sanctuary. Amy was enthusiastic about the site's educational value. It's such a lovely place to introduce children to nature, she said. We don't have many green spaces like this. Some kids have never even seen a cardinal up close. I nodded, heartened. They're lucky to have a teacher who cares about exposing them to wildlife. That can spark a lifelong interest. She smiled. You sound like you know a lot about birds. A moment's hesitation. Then I offered a casual explanation of my background without going into detail. I've done some work with birds over the years, yes. She seemed curious, but I steered the conversation elsewhere. The last thing I wanted was to overshadow the local folks who had championed the sanctuary for decades. My global achievements could wait until absolutely necessary. Nonetheless, word of my interest in ornithology must have trickled through the neighborhood grapevine. One evening, as the golden light of dusk streamed through my living room window, I heard an unexpected knock. Opening the door, I found Karen standing there, posture as rigid as always. This time, her binder was replaced by a smaller clutch of papers. "Good evening," she said coolly. "I've heard from some neighbors that you're involved with birds. Something about you being a bird researcher? Or am I mistaken?" Her tone suggested she found the entire concept suspicious. I forced a polite smile. "Yes, I study birds. I find them fascinating, one of my hobbies." Karen pursed her lips as though I'd admitted to hoarding contraband. "I see. Well, as the vice president of our HOA, I'm here to ensure your hobby doesn't infringe on neighborhood standards. We don't want large flocks causing noise complaints or unsightly droppings." It was hard not to roll my eyes, but I maintained composure. "I can assure you, Ms. Hardell, I'm not luring giant flocks into the neighborhood. The birds are wild. They've been here long before we arrived." She sniffed. "Well, do be mindful. We have strict rules about feeding wildlife on private property. We'd hate for the community to suffer from an overpopulation of pests." With that, she pivoted on her heel and left, leaving me standing there with a racing heart. The encounter felt ominous. Karen's language hinted that she already viewed me and my interest in birds as a potential threat. My thoughts darted to the sanctuary. Surely she wouldn't try to dismantle it. Would she? The voice at the back of my mind reminded me of Mr. Ortega's warning. Perhaps it was time to watch more carefully what Karen's next move might be. A fortnight later, rumors swirled that Karen was petitioning the HOA board to conduct a beautification survey of Sunrise Bluff's peripheral areas. The plan sounded harmless enough to examine the neighborhood's edges and propose improvements. But residents who'd fought Karen's tree removal campaign recognized a pattern. One neighbor confided in me. She uses these so-called surveys to find excuses for large-scale changes. If she deems something unattractive or low value to the HOA, she'll push to have it removed or replaced. A sick feeling crawled into my stomach. The sanctuary lay precisely on that perimeter. With its thick undergrowth and meandering creek, it could easily appear messy or underutilized to someone who prized uniform lawns. Determined to gather firsthand information, I attended the next open HOA meeting. The meeting took place in the clubhouse, a modest hall near the neighborhood pool. Rows of folding chairs faced a wooden dais where the board members sat, with Karen perched in the center, her posture set like a statue. She introduced the beautification survey in glowing terms, describing how it would enhance property values and eliminate unsightly features. She stressed that the perimeter areas often went neglected and could attract unwanted wildlife or, ironically, undesirable elements. When the floor opened for questions, I stood, heart pounding. "Could you clarify if this survey includes reviewing the local bird sanctuary?" Karen fixed me with a too bright smile. "Of course. It's part of our perimeter, after all. We'll be assessing all aspects of that area: growth, potential hazards, cost efficiency. I'm sure we'll find the best approach for the neighborhood." Her response lacked substance, but was dripping with innuendo. After the meeting, I overheard her telling another board member that the sanctuary was rife with disease-ridden birds and didn't serve any real purpose. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. If she truly believed that this was more than a petty turf war, it was a direct threat to a vital habitat, and I was running out of time to protect it. Realizing the danger, I decided to mobilize support. Even if I kept my international credentials quiet, I couldn't stand idly by while Karen targeted the sanctuary. First, I reached out to local environmentalists who had quietly championed the site for years. One was Dr. Helena Castro, a biology professor at the community college. Another was a nature blogger named Samir Gupta, who posted photos of birds at Sunrise Sanctuary. We organized an informal group, calling ourselves Friends of the Sanctuary. Over coffee in my living room, we strategized. We would attend every HOA meeting submit data about the sanctuary's ecological value, and gather signatures from supportive residents. We'd highlight how the presence of a natural habitat actually increased property appeal for many homebuyers. Amy Lee, the teacher, agreed to speak on behalf of the educational value the sanctuary offered to local schools. Mr. Ortega provided historical context. The land was originally designated by the county decades ago for wildlife protection, and the HOA boundaries recognized it as a community green space. Our logic was straightforward. If the sanctuary was recognized legally and beloved by many, it wouldn't be so easy for Karen to bulldoze it, literally or figuratively. However, Karen anticipated our moves. At the next few HOA sessions, her allies systematically challenged every point we made. One board member insisted the sanctuary attracted coyotes. Another claimed it was full of invasive species anyway. Karen herself rolled out a glossy pamphlet showing exaggerated photos of rickety blinds and muddy trails. "Is this what we want new residents to see?" she'd ask rhetorically. I could sense the tide turning. A sizable contingent of neighbors, perhaps ignorant of the sanctuary's true value, were swayed by sensational images. They worried about losing property value, about safety, about liability. The friends of the sanctuary found ourselves confronting myths, distortions, and outright fear-mongering. Meanwhile, Karen pressed for a formal motion to evaluate the feasibility of repurposing the land for better use. She never explicitly said destroy, but her intentions gleamed like a sharpened knife. Undeterred, I decided to leverage my expertise in a more direct way, though I still kept quiet about the breadth of my global renown. With Samir's help, we spent early mornings and late afternoons documenting as many bird species as we could. We compiled lists of sightings, from the common house finch to the rarer orchard oriole. We even observed the occasional hawk nesting in the tall sycamores. Dr. Castro contributed data on pollinators, amphibians, and small mammals that used the sanctuary's diverse plant life. By the time we were done, we had a robust ecology report showing the sanctuary's importance as a corridor for migrating birds, as well as a breeding ground for local species. We discovered that the creek's water quality was above average, cleaner than some nearby streams, largely because of the natural filtration provided by the wetland plants. In short, the sanctuary wasn't just a random patch of wilderness. It was a thriving ecosystem. I arranged a meeting with the county's Environmental Services Department, hoping they might reaffirm the sanctuary's official protected status. The official there, Ms. Danielle Ross, seemed supportive. If it was designated for conservation decades ago, it may still fall under certain protective clauses, she said, though the specifics were murky. The county records were incomplete, and real estate developments had changed boundaries multiple times. Nonetheless, Ms. Ross agreed to a site visit. That small victory felt like a step in the right direction, until Karen's next move blindsided us all. Without warning, Karen submitted a proposal to the HOA board titled Sunrise Bluffs Recreation and Leisure Initiative. In her official capacity, she consulted with a landscaping firm that drew up sketches for a brand new recreational zone at the sanctuary's location. The plan envisioned a tennis court, an expanded picnic area, a dog park, and a parking lot for up to 20 vehicles, right where the bird sanctuary currently stood. The promotional materials showed attractive images of families playing tennis, gleaming green turf, and modern playground equipment. Karen touted it as a dynamic new amenity that will raise property values and offer more benefits to residents. She added that the existing brush and trees are unsightly and underutilized, ignoring the sanctuary's intricate web of wildlife. When I first saw the proposal, I felt a wave of anger so strong that my hands shook. I could hardly believe her audacity. By marketing it as a community upgrade, Karen had neatly sidestepped any mention of the sanctuary's ecological role, turning it into a black-and-white issue, recreation for humans or a seemingly neglected patch of wildland. Neighbors initially seemed torn. Some loved the idea of new amenities, especially those who had no interest in birds. Others were outraged at the potential destruction of a natural habitat. The board scheduled a special meeting to vote on whether to move forward with Karen's plan, set to take place in 2 weeks' time. For the friends of the sanctuary, it felt like a ticking clock. Either we persuaded enough of the community to reject the proposal, or the bulldozers would come. Desperate to sway public opinion, our group began distributing flyers and holding small gatherings at the community clubhouse. We invited neighbors to come learn about the sanctuary's hidden treasures. Children who had visited the site with Amy Lee's class drew colorful posters featuring the birds they'd seen, which we pinned up on easels for all to admire. Yet Karen countered us at every turn. She had the budget to produce glossy pamphlets depicting a shiny, well-maintained tennis court next to a pristine dog run. She hosted weekend events where a slick marketing rep from the landscaping firm described how property values could skyrocket with this strategic upgrade. Many residents, especially those whose children wanted more recreational spaces, found it compelling. Behind the scenes, I grappled with whether to reveal my international background. On one hand, disclosing that I was a globally recognized ornithologist might lend significant weight to the sanctuary's defense. On the other, I feared being accused of outside interference or overshadowing local voices. Dr. Castro urged me, "Don't hold back. The community deserves the strongest possible case to preserve this habitat." Finally, just days before the special vote, the choice was made for me. Karen discovered my professional website, which listed my academic achievements and media appearances. She stumbled upon it, or someone tipped her off, and the next thing I knew, rumors were spreading like wildfire. Neighbors whispered, "Did you know the new person is actually some famous scientist who travels the world studying birds?" Karen lost no time twisting the revelation. "She's an activist," Karen hissed in an HOA meeting, "with international backers who want to dictate what we can do on our own land." She painted me as a meddling outsider bent on imposing an agenda, completely disregarding the fact that I was a resident, too. I was stunned. So much for a quiet life. But if Karen intended to use my credentials to discredit me, she had sorely miscalculated. Because now, I no longer felt compelled to downplay my expertise. If anything, I'd harness it to shine a glaring spotlight on her destructive plans. On the eve of the special vote, a neighbor woke me at dawn with frantic knocking. "They're clearing the trees," he shouted. "You have to come see." My spouse and I threw on clothes and rushed to the sanctuary entrance. Sure enough, a large bulldozer rumbled at the periphery, flanked by workers in neon vests. Several oaks and cottonwoods that formed the outer line of the sanctuary were already cut down, branches piled haphazardly. The noise was deafening, the roar of machinery, the harsh beep-beep of a reversing truck, and the grinding whir of saws. A few panicked birds fluttered overhead, screeching in confusion. My heart seized in horror. This was the very scenario I dreaded. Karen stood nearby, arms folded, watching. When she spotted me, her face was a mask of determination. "We're simply beginning the prep work," she announced coldly. "The board's decision is practically a formality. This project has widespread support, but the vote is tomorrow." I cried, voice shaking. "You have no legal right to tear down trees before it's even approved." She shrugged, a smug smile curling her lips. "Sometimes you have to show a little initiative. Anyway, these were old, half-dead trees. We're improving the area, not destroying it." It was monstrous. My eyes scanned the devastation. Nests likely crushed, chicks displaced, entire canopies gone in a matter of minutes. A wave of heartbreak, mingled with anger, surged within me. I locked eyes with Karen, who stared back unflinchingly. At that moment, I realized there was no limit to her arrogance. She'd circumvented procedures, banked on intimidation, and effectively begun demolishing the sanctuary. I had to act swiftly, or the rest of it would be gone by nightfall. Once it was clear that direct confrontation on-site would only lead to an ugly standoff, I raced home. Furiously, I began making calls to local media outlets, to environmental organizations that respected my work, and even to a few high-profile wildlife charities that I collaborated with internationally. I explained the crisis. A small suburban HOA had begun bulldozing a vital bird habitat under dubious pretenses, ignoring pending votes and potential environmental protections. My name carried weight among conservationists, and within hours, social media lit up with alerts. A regional news crew agreed to come film the destruction. Multiple bird-focused nonprofits tweeted about the urgent need to save Sunrise Sanctuary, linking to images Samir had posted online. By midday, we had a wave of public outcry sweeping across the internet. Local volunteers, outraged nature lovers from nearby towns, and even some of my colleagues from past expeditions promised to show up at Sunrise Bluffs to protest any further bulldozing. Petitions sprang up online, demanding an immediate halt. The HOA's phone lines were clogged with calls, and the board members were inundated with emails from furious bird advocates. Karen seemed caught off guard. She'd counted on local compliance and the usual suburban apathy. She never expected a global community of bird lovers to rally so quickly. Even the county commissioner's office, alerted by Ms. Ross from Environmental Services, ordered a review. An injunction was threatened if the HOA didn't stop all clearing activities until the matter was resolved. The bulldozers halted, at least temporarily. For the first time, Karen's veneer of total control began to crack. Yet she still clung to the notion that her recreation plan was unstoppable. What she didn't realize was that the tide of public opinion had shifted dramatically against her, and she was about to face an even bigger reckoning. The following evening, the special vote took place in the community clubhouse, but the scene bore little resemblance to a typical HOA gathering. Television news cameras lined the back wall, reporters ready to broadcast the result. Police officers loitered near the entrance, presumably to maintain order in case tensions erupted. A swarm of residents, local environmentalists, and out-of-town supporters crammed in, many wearing T-shirts emblazoned with slogans like "Save Our Sanctuary" and "Birds Before Bulldozers." Karen tried to maintain an air of calm authority from her seat at the board's table. The board president, who looked weary and overwhelmed, opened the floor by stating that the session would determine whether the recreation project would proceed. I noticed that two board members, previously silent, now wore anxious expressions, clearly uncomfortable with the bulldozing fiasco. When it was time for community input, the microphone became a stage for impassioned pleas. Amy Lee described the educational impact on her students, painting a vivid picture of how they'd learned about ecosystems through the sanctuary. Dr. Castro shared data illustrating the sanctuary's biodiversity, how each felled tree destroyed critical habitat for nesting and feeding. A local neighbor tearfully recounted seeing baby squirrels fleeing the cut trees with nowhere to go. An out-of-town ornithologist who recognized me from conferences insisted that the scientific community was watching. Karen tried to interject with claims that a dog park and tennis courts would serve far more residents. But each time, she was met with boos and jeers from the crowd. People weren't buying her spin. They'd seen the chainsaws and the bulldozers. They'd seen the nests torn down. Her credibility was in tatters. Finally, I stepped up to the mic. The audience hushed. "I moved here as a neighbor. Quietly, I began. I never intended to draw international attention. But the destruction of this sanctuary, an act carried out prematurely, possibly illegally, demands we speak out. This site offers nesting grounds for dozens of bird species, some of which are declining in other parts of the country. It also benefits the local ecosystem in ways that tennis courts never could. With respect to recreation, there are plenty of ways to incorporate green spaces without demolishing vital habitats." I paused, scanning the sea of faces. I've studied birds worldwide, from the Amazon rainforest to the Arctic Circle, but I've never seen such a tragic disregard for local wildlife in my own backyard. This sanctuary belongs to all of us, human and avian neighbors alike. Please do not vote to destroy what's left. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Cameras flashed. Karen glowered, her knuckles whitening on the table. She muttered something under her breath, but it was lost in the commotion. Then came the board's vote. The president's voice shook slightly as she read the motion. One by one, members cast their ballots. No, no, no. When Karen's turn arrived, she spat out a resentful yes to continuing her plan. But it was a solitary, hollow vote. 4 against, 1 for. The proposal was defeated. A moment of stunned silence hung in the air. Then the room exploded with relief. Neighbors hugged. Environmentalists cheered. A reporter thrust a microphone in Karen's face, asking her how it felt to be overruled. She pushed the camera aside, marched from the room, and vanished into the night. In the days following the vote, Karen found herself besieged by criticism. The local news aired segments showing the partial devastation she'd caused at the sanctuary, with images of felled trees and scattered nests. The county commissioner announced a formal investigation into potential violations of environmental regulations and HOA overreach. Meanwhile, the Friends of the Sanctuary group grew in size and influence, bolstered by newfound community support. Petitions circulated demanding that Karen step down from the HOA entirely. Anonymous letters even urged her to move out of Sunrise Bluffs altogether, though that was a more extreme reaction than I condoned. I simply wanted to ensure no further harm came to the sanctuary. If Karen learned her lesson and abided by the board's decision, so be it. Nevertheless, her once formidable power crumbled. Neighbors who'd previously aligned with her beautification goals realized she'd gone too far, ignoring democratic processes and the habitat's value. Some whispered about lawsuits for property damage. Others simply looked away whenever she passed by. Karen had become a pariah, her carefully curated image of neighborhood leadership shattered. For the sanctuary, the turnaround was swift. The county commissioner's office, spurred by the public outrage, declared it a protected green space pending further legal review. They paused any further changes until official boundaries and status could be clarified. Meanwhile, a local conservation nonprofit stepped in to offer resources for replanting trees and rebuilding the habitat. And as for me, I felt an odd mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that we'd halted the destruction in time to save most of the sanctuary. Sorrow for the dozens of trees already lost and the birds displaced. My dream of a quiet suburban life was gone, but in its place was something that felt even more meaningful. Helping a community realize the inherent worth of the wildlife in its midst. The next few months proved that victory wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a lengthy repair process. The sanctuary's edges, once lined with mature trees, now featured freshly planted saplings donated by local nurseries. Volunteers rolled up their sleeves to remove debris left behind by the bulldozer. Bird feeders, bird baths, and nesting boxes were installed under Dr. Castro's guidance, ensuring that displaced species could begin returning. Children from Amy Lee's school pitched in, painting colorful signs like, "Welcome to the Bird Haven." Samir documented the recovery on his blog, sharing monthly updates on new sightings. Over time, the once silent corners of the sanctuary filled with birdsong again, a testament to nature's resilience. At the official rededication ceremony, the county commissioner cut a ribbon on the restored entrance. Neighbors applauded as small birds flitted overhead. I was asked to give a short speech, which I kept humble. This sanctuary shows that with enough community support and respect for the environment, we can protect the spaces we share with our wildlife neighbors. May this place inspire us all to appreciate the world beyond our fences. The cheers and applause echoed in the clearing. Dozens of residents, from retirees to young families, smiled at one another, a sense of unity shining in their eyes. Karen, of course, was notably absent. About 6 months after the fiasco, word spread that Karen had sold her house. A for sale sign appeared on her lawn one day, and within a couple of weeks, a moving truck was parked in her driveway. Speculation abounded. Some said she'd been too humiliated by the public backlash. Others claimed the HOA had all but forced her out by refusing to let her hold any leadership position. Regardless of the reason, she slipped away without fanfare. A few neighbors saw her directing movers, wearing dark sunglasses and avoiding any small talk. When she finally left, not many tears were shed. Sunrise Bluffs had found a new sense of community pride in preserving the sanctuary, a cause that had united people in the wake of her aggression. Life returned to a gentler rhythm. My spouse and I continued to enjoy the best of suburban living. Quiet mornings on the porch, friendly nods from neighbors walking their dogs, the cheerful ring of children's laughter from the newly improved playground, which the HOA placed away from the sanctuary. But now, there was also a subtle shift in the neighborhood spirit. Gone was the stifling fear of violations for trivial matters. The new HOA leadership encouraged open dialogue and a broader view of community well-being. The sanctuary flourished. Each new season brought fresh surprises. A previously unrecorded species of migrating warbler in the spring, a visiting flock of cedar waxwings in the fall. Occasionally, the local news would do a follow-up story, showcasing how Sunrise Bluffs turned a near tragedy into a conservation triumph. As for me, I never expected that my quiet move to the suburbs would thrust me into the spotlight as an advocate for a small piece of wilderness. Yet in hindsight, it seemed inevitable. My entire life had revolved around protecting avian habitats, large and small. Maybe fate had nudged me here precisely because the birds needed an ally in this place. One crisp morning, I wandered the sanctuary's newly mulched path, listening to the soft rush of the creek. Sunlight filtered through the young saplings, dancing on the water's surface. In the branches overhead, a mockingbird trilled a medley of borrowed tunes, as if celebrating the haven now preserved. I paused near a wooden bench that volunteers had installed, reading the small plaque engraved with a dedication, in honor of those who fought for the voiceless, preserving their song for future generations. My throat tightened with emotion, and I smiled. Yes, the birds were still singing, despite the chainsaws, despite the arrogance of one misguided HOA official. And in their chorus, I heard a reminder that even in the most manicured suburb, wild beauty persists. So long as a handful of people are willing to stand up for it, nature endures. And that, I realized, is the happiest ending of all.